Hopefully you took a look at this first page already, but if you didn't, make sure you do, because it does give a good outline of all the different things that probability statistics kind of influence on a day-to-day basis. Now, the main thing we're going to work on today is just kind of revisiting these old definitions and these old processes, because a lot of probability statistics deals with analyzing data. And if we're just looking at a big string of numbers, that really doesn't tell us anything. So this is where the measures of central tendency come in. What this is talking about is really just those main measurements of data are mean, median, mode, and also includes range. Now, hopefully you at least kind of recognize those 3-4 words, but if you don't, with each example here, I have how to do it, what it is, and of course, an on your own. So make sure as you're going through, read the example, kind of look at how it's done, and then complete the on your own. Now, there's lots of different songs and ways to memorize mean, median, mode and their definitions, but in case you want another example and just kind of a fun way to memorize which one's what, here's a video that kind of goes along with the Lazy Song by Bruno Mars. So if you want to check it out, go ahead and keep watching, or you can fast forward through it.
Today I learned mean, median, mode, and range. Now I'm going to get A's. Median, middle, mode is most. Range is the difference of the high and low. And mean is just another way of averaging. I'm gonna get A's. The first thing you do when you get that number set, you order least the greatest before you forget. It'll make doing your math so easy. To find the mean, the first thing that must be done is you add up all the numbers and calculate the sum and divide it by its quantity. Yes, I'll solve it, I'll solve it, I'll solve it 'cause I can. Today I learned mean, median, mode, and range. Now I'm going to get A's. Median, middle, mode is most. Range is the difference of the high and low. And mean is just another way of averaging. I'm gonna get A's. It's really easy to find the median and mode. One's the middle number and the other appears the most. There really isn't too much math to do.
Why do you have a calculator?
Unless there's an even amount in the set. You average the middle numbers and then you finally get an answer that will be your median. Subtract the low from the high and you'll have the range. Today I learned mean, median, mode, and range. Now I'm going to get A's. Median, middle, mode is most. Range is the difference of the high and low. And mean is just another way of averaging. I'm gonna get A's.
Hopefully that was helpful. If not, just something silly. So now I'm going to let you go ahead and go through the mean, median, mode, and range examples. All the definitions are there. An example on how to do each problem is also there, especially as they mentioned in the video down here with the median, whenever you have the odd and even amount of elements. So take your time. If you need to check your answers, just check with the completed notes that are on Blackboard. There is one example I do kind of want to go over with you though. So on this second page here about the range, it says it's the difference between the largest and the smallest value. Now, difference we talked about a few times now always means subtraction. So if you're subtracting the largest value and the smallest value, the thing you really need to look out for are your negatives. Because in this on your own, if I'm trying to find the range, I can see that 19 is my largest value, -4 is my smallest. Now remember, a range is like how far apart the numbers are spread. So if I want to do 19 minus that -4, you have to think way back to our addition and subtraction qualities, especially when we have negatives involved. Or use your calculator. So anytime we had this situation here with a double negative, remember we would turn them into one big plus sign. So really, even though we are doing 19 minus -4, it ends up being 19 plus 4, which gives us 23 as our range. So no matter what, positive, negative, decimals, whatever, you always subtract. And then of course, if you have to change the operation due to a negative, you should. Now, something that might be a little further from your memory is this whole idea about quartiles and the interquartile range. So quartile, you should see kind of the key word in there is quart. So quart we know is kind of like quarter, so it breaks it up into 4. So you can see that a quartile just divides the data up into 4 equal parts. Now, to get those 4 parts, the first thing you want to find is the median. And you can see kind of on this chart right here that the median is called the Q2, so it's the second quartile. So once we get that median, you can kind of see that we have 2 halves of the data. We have the lower half and then the upper half. So if we take those 2 halves and we cut them in half again, this is where we get our first quartile and our third quartile. Now, once we get those corresponding numbers, this is where the interquartile range comes in. You're going to see it a lot of time represented with IQR. So from here on out, just look out for those 3 letters. And it's just the difference between the first and the third quartile. So kind of think about it like the range between the Q3 and the Q1. I know this is a lot of random vocab, so just stick with me through the example and hopefully it starts to make a little more sense. So like usual, when we're dealing with data in this example, the first thing you want to do is get it in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to take a second and do that here. Okay, so you can see from my scratch work here that it's a good idea to kind of cross off as you go, so that way you don't miss any numbers as you're going, especially if there's doubles involved, because you want to make sure you include every number that's originally in the set. Okay, so the first thing, find the median. Again, median is our Q2, so you're essentially finding the middle value. So just like we did before, you're going to go ahead and cross off from smallest to largest. Oop, missed my 7. Okay, until I'm left with my middle value. I kind of went over it a little bit. So my Q2 is 11. Now next it says to find the... Now, question number 3 says to find the median of the first half of the data. So whenever you're dealing with these Q1 and Q3s, you do not want to include the median in your second set of cross-offs. So if you notice, the first half is set from 3 to 11. The second half of the set is set from 12 to 20. So to find my Q1, I'm going to go ahead and cross off again, least to greatest, through my lowest and highest value, but notice I'm not including that 11 that I already circled. So my Q1 is going to be 8. Because again, now it's the middle of the first half of my data set. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the upper half. Again, notice I'm not crossing off that median, so that I have 14 as the half of my upper data set. So essentially you're finding the median 3 times. Median of the whole set of data, the median of the lower half of the data, and then the median a 3rd time with the upper half. So now that I have my Q3 and Q1, the last question I have down there is subtract Q3 from Q1, and this is our IQR, or our range of our quartiles. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 14 minus 8. So my IQR is 6. Now this is very important, especially as we go to organize our data and when we look at box and whisker plots. Okay, so box and whisker plots actually just take that information that we just looked at, so our Q1, 2, 3, and just organize it in a graph. So box and whisker, you can obviously see from that top example, the box comes from the middle section and the whiskers are those 2 lines coming off the sides. Now, each point and line on that box and whisker plot represents something. If you kind of refer to this box as I'm talking here, the first thing is that these dots on the outside on the whiskers are the extremes. So the minimum or the least number of days would be that first dot over there on the left. And then the maximum or the greatest number of days it rained or snowed is on the right. So the first thing about the graph is that the dots on either end are your minimum and maximum. Okay, so just like everywhere else, the second part is the median, and of course the median's in the middle, so actually find the median right in the middle of the graph. So not only is it in the middle, it actually splits our graph kind of into two halves. So as you can see from the explanation there, half the days are over 6 days of rain or snow, and then half the months had fewer than 6 days of rain or snow. Now this last example box is talking about data clusters, so you can kind of see that our graph is broken down into 4 different sections. We have this first section between 2 and 3, second section between 3 and 6, third section between 6 and 7, and the fourth goes between 7 and 10. Now we know from the last example that these quarters are broken down from our Q1 and Q3. So the last thing that kind of breaks off this graph are these 2 vertical lines on the 3 and the 7. So the 3 is our Q1, so it's the middle of our lower half of the data, and the 7 is our Q3, which is the middle of the upper half of the data. Okay, so the main thing to remember about box and whisker plots is it's broken up into 4 pieces, from the min to the Q1, Q1 to Q2, Q2 to Q3, and then the Q3 to the max. So each line or dot represents a particular piece of the data. Okay, so if we look down at this bottom example, you can see this is talking about baskets made. So the first question, what are the least and greatest number of baskets made? You're looking at the front and the back of the graph. So the least we can say is 5, and the most we can say is 15. Okay, second question, so what is the median number? Remember, median's in the middle, even if it's on a weird graph like this. So that middle line would be the median, so we can say that it's 10. What are the upper and lower quartiles for the data? So remember, the upper and lower quartiles just break up the upper and lower half of the datas into half again. So essentially you're looking at those other 2 lines that are on our graph. So lower quartile, again, lower half of the data, you're looking at 6. Upper half of the data, you're looking at 12. Now the fourth question, where are the data clustered? Remember, the clusters are just the 4 quarters of the data, so you can kind of see how they're broken up, but if we want to list them out, so the first thing between the min and our Q1 would be between 5 and 6. The second cluster goes from the Q1 to the Q2, which is between 6 and 10. Then from 10 to the Q3 of 12, and then finally 12 to the max of 15. And as far as the extremes, remember the extremes are just the answers we had for number 1, so the least and greatest number of baskets. So it really just tells us the minimum baskets that were made and the maximum baskets that were made for that day. Okay, so hopefully this was a good review on our central tendencies and box and whisker plots. Hopefully you've seen it somewhere before, but in case you haven't, on the homework there is a question that asks you to make a box and whisker plot, but I have included a video that also walks you through how to do it. So no excuses, make sure you tried out every question on the homework, and I will check it over tomorrow.